Okay. He says there's. Welcome back, everyone.
Yeah, sorry about that, guys. No problem.
But we, hopefully that Highland will be taking care of that answer to your question.
So I'm going to start a presentation soon, but I heard something about questions, so I'm happy to take any questions people had going forward. Did anyone have any questions?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, good. And I just, I know there's some people are wondering now, what the heck am I doing here? And wondering, I don't know if anyone remembers when I think it was Ross Perot's Admiral Stockdale's choice as vice president. He said at the debate, "What am I doing here?" And it was a good question, but probably a funny one to ask in a debate. But feel free to always say, this is a group of community leaders that are trying to work on a very complicated issue of community broadband. And so you're bound to have lots of questions, not understand a lot, steep learning curve here to start. Just know that as we go through this process that we do, I think, a pretty good job of building week to week about the information that you need at the time. And we build that through the process. So by the end of the 16 weeks, we'll have covered some of the material a couple times. You'll have heard different perspectives from different speakers on different broadband technologies, partnerships, financing, all these kind of topics. And so I've told a lot of people, if you're not totally confused by when we go halfway through, you're not thinking hard enough. So it's so just try and be comfortable in your skin and in the process, and be fearless about asking questions, and we'll do our best to answer those. So again, thanks for joining today and participating as community leaders in this process. I'm going to do a presentation now, and we're going to talk about a few different things today, and you should be seeing my screen. Is that looking good, Adrienne?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. So here we are. Although I forgot the change some text here. Here we have the sponsors we talked about: Heartland Forward, Connecting the Heartland, Department of Economic and Community Development, UT Extension, and the Benton Institute. Here's kind of our agenda for the day. Usually I don't talk so much, but today is going to be a lot of me. So feel free to take everything I say with a grain of salt, but I think we're going to go through really three different topics here. One is how this program works. Two is kind of a broadband 101. And number three is kind of an intro to digital equity that we're going to be talking about here as we go. So hold on and feel free to ask questions in the chat. And I can't really see the chat, but I know that Adrienne will keep a good look on that and ask me any of those questions. So here's our, we've done this. This is a map of our counties. You can see that we've got a pretty good representation. We've got quite a number in the east, and one in the central, and one a little more west here. I think a nice selection of communities, and thank you again for your participation. So as we think about this program, we created this program in Minnesota, and I was involved in that. And we were trying to, this is pre-pandemic, and we were going to bring community teams together at a central location and spend a week on site helping communities learn about broadband and create their county broadband program. Right before launch, the pandemic hit, so that was the end of that, and we substituted webinars over a 10-week period where we covered a lot of that curriculum, and we recorded those webinars, and those are available online, and we'll give you a link where you can find those in our follow-up email that we'll send out over the next day or so, covering a lot of the curriculum that's in this program. There's also a guidebook that the Benton Institute co-published with the Blandon Foundation out of Minnesota to show this curriculum. Our original idea to have these teams was kind of lost with the webinars, and so we then switched to creating this program. And this is one of the beautiful things that came out of the pandemic in terms of community broadband planning, is the ability to work with 4 to 6 communities at a time, county communities, to help them create their broadband plans. And it's proven to be pretty effective through the process. And so we want to determine, pursue, and achieve the best possible broadband solution for your community. And I think this is really important to think about, that this is your plan as going forward. This is something that you create, that you guys own and adopt and pursue. It's not, you could hire a broadband consultant who could give you a plan, and then at the end of that planning process, you would have all those decisions to make about what is really your broadband plan. And so through this process, we help you a guided self-help planning process that your teams are going to create, and that at the end, we hope that your county boards and school boards and township officials adopt as their plan. We have every week we're going to give you content to absorb, and then worksheets to complete. And so if you go through this process and do the worksheets over this 16-week period, you're essentially going through a decision-making funnel where you can really have a great customized community plan. And so we've started this process, the leadership recruitment. Your team is here working together. We're going to be giving you this online education. Each week we'll have guest speakers who are experts in their fields, some of our nation's best broadband consultants and technologists. So it's going to be a great experience there. Information gathering, vision development and consensus building on your team, opportunity analysis, which provider partners and so on would you want to select, which kind of funding opportunities make the most sense. Then at the end of this program is a report. You'll do a presentation to the other communities in this program, and then hopefully deliver that presentation to boards and officials and groups in your community to build that community consensus. And then finally, project development, actual applying for grants, working with broadband providers, partners, and so on. When we think about the team, I always think that bigger is better. So we asked for a minimum of 8, but we've seen teams function 12, 15 people, even up to 20 people on the team, knowing that in some cases, people have commitments, they have doctor appointments, vacations, sick kids and everything. So if you have a big team, then you're always going to have enough people there to help carry that conversation through with that variety of knowledge and skills. Not all this is about technology. Some of it's finance, some of it's communications and community relations, some of it's politics. And so knowing that you have the right people with the community connections and the affiliations with your key organizations like local units of government, school districts, healthcare, chambers of commerce, and so on. We go through the shared learning experience. We have these, we have archived webinars and other online resources that we ask you to look through in advance every week to kind of, we'll give you some choices and you can either assign those or just see what's in your interest area. A lot of web resources, maybe some tours we did on site in Illinois. In our current group, we went and toured a farm, one of the communities, and saw how they use technology and so on. What we're looking for is this active engagement in the information gathering process. And then that information process is this, community surveys, and we talked about those last week, and Sridhar will maybe have a little update here before the end of the meeting, just in terms of when communities can take a look at that draft survey. Turns out there's some university process that has to be covered, but getting out and seeing what your community thinks about broadband, the challenges the community faces, and so on, and then gathering speed test data. We're really looking to see on a community survey, you do this for two reasons. One is to inform community officials about how important broadband is, and the second part is attracting, gathering data to attract broadband providers so that they can see what the options or what the marketplace is for broadband in your community. Helps justify their investment. This is something that we've seen different communities do with key customer focus groups. Again, in Illinois, we just had a community that a very interesting group of young farmers as a focus group to gather information about how they get by without broadband now and what they do if they had better broadband. We'll be doing a little Tennessee tour the week of June 19th, so we want to start to think about scheduling that. I'll be in your communities for 4 or 5 hours. We'll have to see how that schedule goes and see whether we want to have a community broadband summit in your community with providers and community members and local business people and so on, or do some kind of focus groups or tours, or however you think best would utilize that time in your community. A huge part of this program is these provider interviews, talking to both your existing broadband providers and prospective ones. You may have existing providers that are interested in expanding. You may have providers that aren't really interested in expanding, but it's important to chat with them in any case. And then you may see a great community-oriented provider in the next county, not too far away, that you say, hey, we'd love to have that provider in our community, so let's go chat with them and see what their interest is. And then we'll work with you to understand the maps and the GIS tools around the state broadband maps, speed test data that you'll gather through the survey, grant eligibility maps, and then the new FCC maps that are continually being updated now and improving. This vision development consensus building, this is really the time through this 16-week program to really understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish, what's good enough for your community. We ask you to create a vision statement that helps document that kind of discussion, understanding the trade-offs that may be necessary. Speed of deployment, cost of deployment versus long-term economic development potential, all kinds of things. So you don't want to get to the end of the session and still be kind of trying to work on those kind of issues. It's really important that you think about that through this process and decide what's the right choices, again, for your community. And then opportunity analysis. Who's your best provider partner options? What are the funding strategies most applicable to your community? Are you prepared to be a good partner? So if we want providers to be good partners, obviously, and one of the ways to help that happen is for the community to really understand their role, what they're willing to do, what their expectations are. So if you can be clear about that, then it's much easier for a provider partner to say, yes, that's a group I want to work with, not a provider partner that invests all kinds of money in engineering and writing grant applications, only to have the local officials kind of step back and say, well, we're not sure about this now. after all that work has been done. So to get a good partner, be a good partner. The report to the community is sharing your vision and strategy early and often. So think about this as a way to get out there and through newspaper articles and meetings and presentations, updates to community boards and so on as you go. You can really help build that consensus in the community. Don't create a secret plan, but really seek input and share your information, again, early and often. So this is a report to the community, and then present the findings and recommendations. And then always think about recruiting additional champions as on an ongoing basis. So you're building your team, building that advocacy coalition to make things happen down the road. And then finally, project development. This can happen fast or slow. If you find a right broadband provider partner and you meet the right funding opportunity, things can happen quickly. Other communities struggle to find that right partner to build a consensus to add additional local funding. You know, it can be, obviously, if this was easy, it would have been done by now. If the rural broadband deployment was profitable, that would have been done by now. So we're trying to overcome a lot of different barriers in this process. And so sometimes that can take a while. You can have some success in some parts of your county, other parts might be slower. So comprehensive or piecemeal. We used to see 5 years ago, 4 years ago, even county-wide kind of broadband projects where an entire county, one provider would come in and say, we're going to overbuild your entire county in a public-private partnership. Now with the various funding that's already been dispersed through state and federal governments, that becomes a more complicated puzzle of a map. And so we're seeing a lot more kind of piecemeal development where chunks of counties are covered in projects rather than a comprehensive approach. And then sometimes it's straightforward and sometimes it's just complicated with multiple strategies and multiple attempts. And then finally, timeline vendors. We all think it's, well, here's our plan, let's go ahead and do this. Sometimes you'll be halfway through a process and a provider will announce, oh, we're applying for grants for your entire county. That may be a provider you like, or maybe it's one that's not very popular. And so dealing with that kind of provider community can be challenging sometimes. Sometimes it's great news. Other times you can see that as a challenge. The grant cycles really out of community control. So when does Tennessee get their federal money and how do they decide to disperse it and so on. USDA has funding programs that they will announce on occasion. There's one open right now, a Reconnect program we'll talk about more soon. Local politics is always fun. What's your appropriate role for government? What's the financial commitment possible? Staffing resources, you maybe have staff on board and halfway through they decide to take a different job or get called into other projects. So all those things can be a challenge for local communities. Here's our calendar. Every Wednesday morning from 8:30 to 10:30 Central. We encourage you to try and block that time and protect it as well as you can, but we know that life intervenes. And so we don't take attendance, but we do start to worry if the meeting room isn't quite as full as it was with your community, if key folks aren't participating. So hopefully keep people active and so on. We don't really have a problem usually with people falling out of the program. I think people see the value, that they like the education sessions that we provide to them, the interaction on the community teams, that communities in this process make a lot of progress in a relatively short period of time. And so that keeps their interest, keeps them engaged, and they see the possibilities. You can see where we are right now, May 3rd. And then next week, we'll be talking about broadband surveys with the speed test. Tennessee Extension Service is positioned to help you really implement these surveys and get them out the door and tabulate the results and help you understand the results. So we'll be covering that in detail next week. The week after that, broadband maps. Tennessee has a very robust mapping system. I have some maps here I'll show you in a few minutes with your counties. And so there's a lot of information there with mapping that we can do. Broadband mapping is one of the key determinants of success these days, to understand your situation, to target areas for grants and so on. And so if you have GIS people who work for your county, I'd encourage them to be on your team. Or if you don't have that capacity at your county, maybe your regional planning agency has that kind of GIS capabilities. If you have a great mapping person, that's really helpful to your community. We'll also be doing some mapping of the survey results. Then the setting of the vision and the goals, coalition building and communicating the vision. Then we get into some heavier weeks of fiber optic overview one week, and then a wireless overview the next. Then we'll be on site in your communities. So we want to get that planned. And then we jump into the federal and state financing that's coming down the pike, the feasibility studies that may be necessary. Maybe get through this program and say, hey, we need more detailed cost estimates. We need to do more work to attract provider partners, more information for grant requests. And so a feasibility study might be a smart strategy for you. We'll help you understand the different ownership and partnership models that are possible to get broadband deployed, from private sector only to public-private partnerships to cooperatives to public sector ownership and so on. One of the things I'd encourage you to remember is that two things. One is that there's differences between ownership and operations, and just always know that you want to keep all your options open for broadband networks. And I understand in Tennessee there's some limitations on public ownership, but we'll have speakers that address that and help you think about ways to get things done in your community. And then another week on financing. The last 2 weeks we have community planning sessions where I'll meet with your community once or twice for 1 to 2 hours each time and help you understand, what is it we've learned and what's our plan going forward. So help you create your final plan and presentation. And then that week at August 9th is kind of our graduation ceremony where each community does their presentation. With that, I'm going to pause and see if people have questions or comments about the program and the process. I like questions. I like to think that people are out there.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I get that once we do the surveys, then we're going to create a new map, right? So we can kind of get an accurate picture of, broadband deployment in the county. But I'm curious about, in the mapping process, in the testing survey, how we move about that in an orderly manner. Do we start off with yet another map with points on the map, survey points, or how do we do that in an orderly fashion? I know you guys have done it many times. I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah, and so a lot of times we collect geographic information when we collect that survey, and generally we don't do sample surveys. We try and do the community sample and get as many responses back as possible. The idea is actually to get dots on the map across your county of, you can really look and see where's the dissatisfaction, where's the marketplace for new and improved broadband services. And so we actually do a lot of work to collect addresses and contact information. Again, going to the point that the goal of this program is to get broadband to particular locations. If we can collect names and phone numbers and email addresses and get permission, which we do ask for on the survey, to share that with the selected provider partners, that is really a great marketing effort to show providers here's specific places where there might be 50 or 100 or 200 people who want better broadband services. And that's very powerful for attracting the providers as well as for showing them where the marketplace is for that. And so throughout this process, we help you. We've got the survey kind of modeled, and you'll be that will come to you very soon. And you know, step by step, we help you through that process of how many surveys are coming in. We can map where those surveys are from, and so on. So it's a pretty orderly process. We ask you to really get as many community partners on board as you can to help promote that, whether that's schools or churches or the library, the Chamber of Commerce, and push that out in as many ways as you can. Does that answer your question?
Asking people to do this, but I would imagine that we'll have some holes in that. You know, there'll be some areas of the county that won't be addressed by the surveys, and I'm wondering, then do we go out physically and do these tests ourselves and then just kind of plug in these areas that we didn't get responses?
Yeah, we have had communities go out and get champions that will actually go door to door with an iPad and ask people just at the front door to be able to complete the survey and maybe do a speed test there off a Wi-Fi network. I think it is important that sometimes different parts of a county are harder to reach, or maybe people are a little reluctant to answer a survey. So if you can get either township officials or local champions to help do that work, promote it, you know, we can really push that out. We've had schools participate in really promoting the survey, and that tends to get equalize some of that response across the counties. If you look and see your survey does have big gaps, we've had some communities then get the county tax assessor to kind of look at the property tax rolls and create mailing labels for certain areas, and push it out by a postcard, direct mail right to the people's homes and ask them to fill out the survey. So a lot of different strategies to make that happen.
Hey, this is Ron Gregory. Quick question. We've done a lot of these speed tests in certain areas around our neighborhoods. Are they the ones that we've already done? Are we still able to use them, or do we have to do a different one now?
Well, I think if you've already done they're pretty recent, I think that would be fine to use those and decide, you know, each community is a little different. Some people have already done surveys. So if you've done a very recent one, you know, we wouldn't ask you to throw that one away. We might look at how do we maybe relaunch and get more people to complete the survey if they, if you don't feel you have adequate numbers, since we've had that done. Well, let's just deal with that on a case-by-case basis to design an approach that works for your community.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? You can see it's a comprehensive approach, and that if you hang in there and kind of do the work and have these conversations in your teams, that's that will be really helpful for you. I can see that Adrienne has put in the chat a link to the guidebook, which I think is really helpful especially the community leader to kind of see what's coming forward here. But also know that calling us anytime, especially me, I'd encourage you to contact me as your first point of contact to help get things done. Good. All right. We're going to do a Broadband 101 now, and I'm going to go back to my slides and reshare that. And, so there's a lot of jargon in broadband, and you don't have to know it all. You don't have to be a big technologist to understand a lot of the choices going on here. We're not asking you to design the network. We're just asking you to pursue the network. And so when we think about, how good is our broadband, a lot of times we think primarily about the download speed. And that is, the idea of how fast can we receive information. And so, but also, and more important, is the upload speed. And so that, as we think about people working from home, doing these video conferences, saving information in iCloud or Dropbox, a lot more information is going upstream than used to be. And so that upload speed is really important, and different technologies have different capabilities in terms of that upstream. So that's really something to consider strongly as you move forward. Certainly the idea that affordability is really important. That is a key consideration. It doesn't do much good to have great broadband available if it's $200 for the majority of a lot of families. And so that affordability is a critical issue. Reliability is certainly important, and the more you use broadband, the more important the reliability becomes. So if you're a business and you have a processing system to take credit cards and do inventory and ordering and reservations and so on, that reliability is really important. Many people who work from home, their internet doesn't work, they don't really get paid. And it's hard to tell the boss, that, 25% of the time my internet doesn't work, and so I can't work a reliable amount of time. And so having that reliability for many people is more important even than the broadband speeds. If the speeds are adequate, having that reliability is a critical piece. We know that there's many rural families that are trying to have multiple ways to connect, all of them expensive, satellite, cellular, fixed wireless, all hoping that on any given day their broadband will work. And so that reliability really is tied to affordability as well in that case. Latency is the delay between the time you hit send and the time you get the response back on that. And that's one of the key differentiators between a fiber network, where that latency might be as low as 6 milliseconds, and a traditional satellite system that it might be up to 1,000 milliseconds or a second. And so that's why people on video conferences on satellite, it's more like talking on a two-way radio. It's also a challenge to do corporate networks, hook into a corporate network on these satellite systems and so on, because that latency is so large. And then finally, mobility is a critical piece. We all want, one or two devices on us at all time that could connect to the internet, whether that's a phone or a tablet and so on. And so that mobility is something that people want. And so when we talk about, well, do we want fiber or do we want wireless? The answer generally is both. Here are some of the rural challenges. You know it, you live it: low population density, rocky soils and mountains, the competitive and complicated grant processes that make it tough for small communities to get in on the dollars. sometimes your incumbent provider, they're not really interested in improving services, but they sure don't want a different provider coming in. So you have challenges there. The broadband maps, always, what's good enough? Certainly the new FCC maps are said to be much better in the traditional way of reporting. It was done at the census block. And so if one house in a census block, which could be several miles across, was served, the provider could claim the whole census block is served. That's not the case anymore, as the providers have to respond at a much smaller level, at essentially the address level geographies. And then digital equity considerations. Rural populations can be older, have more low-income folks, that make it a real challenge for a provider to come in and make an investment if people can't really afford to sign up, or maybe have a lack of knowledge or interest about why they would want to spend $30, $40, $50, $75 for an internet connection. This is your Tennessee broadband map that shows the areas with less than 100 by 20 in the red. And so you've got a lot of green area. Green means go, red means stop. And so that's kind of what the state looks like statewide. And then just to show your individual counties, there's Bedford. You can see a fair mix of green and red. And you may look at this and say, well, this is crazy. We don't have nearly that good a broadband service. And so that's what we're hoping to do. Then the BEAD programs, people's ability to challenge the maps and provide alternate documentation is going to be there. So you want to make sure that you're gathering good information there. Claiborne has a lot of coverage. That northwest corner looks pretty sparse for broadband. So on. Here's Decatur. That is lots of red, a real challenge there. Monroe, a little bit of a patchwork. And then Roane County. When we think about broadband and what's good enough, the current standard at the federal government for what's broadband is less than 25 down and 3 up is considered unserved with broadband. And I'm sorry, I forgot to take Illinois off of here. I need to look and see. Reed, what's your standard or your goal in Tennessee?
So we're the official standard that we're going to have for the BEAD program. I don't think we've released that language, but obviously we're going to be compliant with the 120 set forth by NTIA, and hope, allow for that to be scaled up. So not making that the ceiling, but allow for people in counties who are trying to get ahead of it and offer, things up, like gig symmetrical. That's going to be something that we're interested in, but 120 is definitely the minimum.
Good, thank you. And so we have the government standards, but we know that the marketplace has really outraced the standards. The federal standard has gone from 4 megabits to 10 to 25, and has been at 25 now for a while. While now in the wired marketplace, certainly the gigabit is the standard and widely deployed by anyone who's got fiber optics in the ground. And so that and one of the nice things about fiber optics is that it's symmetrical, both high speed up and down is really quite easy to do there. We're also seeing now residential neighborhoods and places with a 10 gigabit service, and really all the new fiber electronics are 10 gigabit capable. And so as we think about, the future, we want to make sure that you're thinking about what's coming. And as we think about, one of the things I would say is that, when the electric came to rural areas, they generally called it the electric or the light company, because that was the main purpose of electricity when it was first being deployed, was electric light. And that idea of driving by people's homes and there'd be that light on, that was seen as progress. But we all know there's 1,000, 1,000,000 different applications for electricity now. And so that's the same thing with the internet service. We just don't know what kind of applications are coming down the pike to we're going to need to support. And so we now see that the cable companies with our are at 1 gigabit and 50 megabit up. We're seeing cable companies increasingly shifting to fiber. And then if you just have an old telephone line, the twisted pair copper lines, that's just really being, that's technologically obsolete, and there's not really much use for that. I'm going to go through some of these technologies here and relatively quickly, but here's the fiber, almost unlimited capacity, symmetrical, very reliable, a low cost to maintain with a long 30 to 50 years. And really we've seen moving from just one color of light down that path to up to 200 different colors simultaneously going down these fiber optic lines. And know that if you want great wireless in your county for cellular data and fixed wireless, that fiber is a key part of that. We know it's relatively expensive to build and it takes time to build. And so that's the challenge with fiber. Here's the DSL service. It wasn't long ago, the federal government gave a bunch of money to the incumbent phone companies to improve DSL service through what they called the CAF2 program. But ultimately, the companies would put in DSL access modules. Those are the red dots. The circles are where you can get more than 25 megabit service. And so you can see here in a rural county in Minnesota, where we mapped out where those improvements were made, how much of the county was left unserved. In cable networks, usually they bring fiber to a node and serve 100 to 250 homes. A high download capacity. We know it's widely available in urban areas. The profitability, cable companies have been highly profitable based on their data and cable service, but they like in their higher density areas. Usually they like to be where you can get 20 homes in a mile. Rural areas are much less than that. We know 1 or 2 or 5, 10 homes per mile, depending on kind of the geography. They have done a lot of research and new technology to bring future 10 gigabit service over fiber and coaxial. But I think most cable companies now, if they're going to be deploying large areas of new homes, they're just doing fiber there. The big advantage or disadvantage of cable industry is the non-symmetrical service, that they market the gigabit service, but generally that's limited to maybe up to 50 megabit service on the upload speed. And generally we see 10 to 20% of download speed as their rule of thumb. We have seen much more interest in rural cable companies in rural areas now that all these federal funds are flowing. And then cellular, we know it's mobile. Most people have 4G service. We've just, companies have shut down their 3G service, and with 5G kind of on the way. There's a lot of different flavors of 5G. We'll talk a little bit more about that and a lot more on our wireless week. But you can see the speeds definitely increasing by the providers overall. And then the 5G technologies, in short, really there's two different kinds. The 5G is a technical standard, but it really depends on which frequencies you're using 5G equipment in. Verizon talks about their gigabit level 5G, and that's really for football stadiums, college campuses, inside buildings, and so on. It's high speed, but a very, very short distance. Where the T-Mobile, when they market their 5G, it's much slower speeds, just 100 megabits, but goes a much longer distance. And now we're seeing almost all the providers moving to using 5G technologies in these mid-band frequencies. And then know that it's, we all know that in rural places, cell service can be spotty. We know that it's expensive generally for compared to a wired connection, and that if you hit your data caps, they'll slow your speeds down. And then fixed wireless, which is a great alternative in the rural prairie and countryside, can now deliver more than 100 megabits. It's gotten to be more reliable. It's quick to deploy, relatively inexpensive to deploy compared to fiber optics, but it also has a lot of challenges that when you put in a fixed wireless system, if you get 80% coverage in an area, that's pretty good based on line of sight and trees and so on. Fixed wireless is also has much higher operating costs. And again, your service depends on where you live. If you're close to that tower within a mile, not too bad, but if you get out 3, 4, 5, 6 miles, that service is definitely going to be less than spectacular. And then traditional geostationary satellite, the old-fashioned kind, HughesNet and so on. Satellites are up 20 miles into the sky. Takes a long time for that signal to go back and forth. And so that is a real challenge. The speeds have improved, but you can see that long list of disadvantages around pricing and bandwidth caps, the speeds, high latencies, and then the weathers. And then the final satellite one is the low Earth orbit satellites. That's Starlink, essentially. The latency is much diminished because those satellites are much closer to Earth. We know that the speed is from 50 to 250 megabits per second. We see a lot of variability in the speeds with those satellites because they're coming and going. And so when you're, again, have great line of sight to that satellite, when it's right above, the speeds are going to be higher. When it gets off closer to the horizon, those speeds slow down significantly. We do know there's waiting lists, high sign-up costs, relatively high subscription costs, and know that you need a clear view of the sky. With a Hughes satellite, you just need a path that satellite never moves, and so you can kind of aim it through trees and so on. But with Starlink, you know, that it's more coming and going, so you have the wider view of the sky you have, the better your service will be. And then people have talked about the services declining with more users. And so that's our Broadband 101. We're going to spend an hour on fiber networks later this course, and also another hour on wireless networks, so I have a much better understanding. And we'll send some resources that if you're really interested, you can go kind of explore online and look at information about fiber optics from Corning and Calix and some of the equipment manufacturers that are promoting fiber optics and so on. Any questions or comments? So when you go through this program, you know, here's really the kind of the your possible outcomes that you may end up with, and I encourage you to work hard and get the highest possible outcomes that you can get. Ideally is the top one, a fully implementable projects with identified provider partners and likely financing plan. We have communities that are involved in that and have been able to come out of this program with those things. We've even had communities come out with funded projects as a result of seeing the opportunities that emerge while we're going through the planning program. This conceptual plan with prospective partners and financing plan, really identifying your best provider partners is really the most important thing you can accomplish in this program. And so I really encourage you as we, when we start to talk about those provider interviews, to get on those right away. We have one of our consultant who's worked with us and presented before. He always talks about the ham sandwich, you know, that you go out and have a little lunch with a provider. Maybe that's all it will take to get the ball rolling. And we have examples of that, certainly, but to build relationships, understand which providers you trust and see as a long-term partner for your community. That's really important. Sometimes you might need a broadband feasibility study where you actually hire a broadband engineering firm, consulting firm to look and say, okay, how many miles of fiber do we need and what's that cost going to be, and what's the pro forma based on your survey results and so on, to build a business plan so you can understand exactly how much subsidy that plan might require to get a provider interest. And that we've seen communities decide to go that way, either county-wide or for key parts of their county. Or you may decide, hey, we're just going to let the marketplace take care of this, and we don't have the resources, or we can't find a provider partner, and maybe decide to do nothing. That's always a choice, but we haven't had communities really decide that yet, but it is always an option. And then finally, I'm just going to spend a few minutes on the idea about digital equity. And this program, we really focus on the infrastructure side. And that infrastructure is an important part of the kind of the digital equity idea, but it also is only one part of it. We focus on this, the infrastructure, through the Accelerate program, but it doesn't eliminate the need for, whether it's the same team members you have on your team or maybe a different team, to think about, well, how do we deal with affordability of broadband, and how do we make sure that families of all incomes can afford to sign up for broadband service, as well as people can figure out how to make use of the technology through building their digital skills. And so here's kind of the some definitions around digital equity, which is really the condition in which individuals and communities have the capacity that's needed for full participation. The digital inclusion is that these are really the strategies that your community is undertaking to push forward on making sure, on achieving digital equity. Excuse me. And when we think about equity, it's really this access, adoption, and use stool of is the broadband infrastructure available and adequate? Again, that's what we're dealing with in this program. And then the adoption, are people subscribing to and able to use broadband? And then finally, the use. And that's not only about individuals, but also about your own institutions. How are your schools, governments, local businesses utilizing broadband within the community? And this use, and the use by your organizations in your community, that really helps drive broadband. You know, people say, why would I want broadband? You'd say, well, because the local clinic allows you to get a cheaper consultation with your doctor if you do it by video conference or online by filling out a form, or your schools are going to do education in a certain way, and your kids really need that broadband connection to be able to effectively complete their schools. And it goes on to churches and social groups and local retailers and so on. So that's why that use side is so important. When we think about the digital divide, certainly in terms of urban areas, we see them pretty well covered. Rural areas are much less covered, almost 15% or 9 million Americans without the need to, without the ability to connect. Tribal communities have very low access. And then just the idea of education and income being real challenging in terms of people adopting technologies. And so helping folks overcome these barriers is an important part of that. And we can see kind of throughout the United States, rural Americans having lower levels of broadband adoption than urban areas. Certainly affordability is a critical piece of this, and the United States has very high costs for broadband, and we have a very non-competitive market. Most families only have really one provider choice for broadband in terms of a quality provider that meets that 25/3 standard. Generally, in most places, that's either the in an urban area, that'd be the cable company, traditionally Comcast or Mediacom or Charter. In rural areas, that may be a rural telephone cooperative or a electric co-op. And so there's definitely fewer choices in the rural community. And fewer choices is not necessarily a terrible thing if that provider that you have is, you know, high quality, high speeds, affordable pricing, and so on, that maybe a co-op does provide. And then the different things you can do around broadband adoption: form a little subcommittee, collaborate with your stakeholders, schools, healthcare providers, public health, senior groups, all kinds of folks. One big barrier to broadband adoption is the lack of devices. And so a lot of families of means might have 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 kind of computers in their home. Other places might only, they might celebrate the arrival of their first computer. And so by working with groups like PCs for People and others, local and national companies, Comcast has quite a program. You can distribute computers and devices. Providers also have discount programs communities can make community members aware of. The ACP program, which we'll talk about a lot more later through this program, federal subsidies of $30 per household for broadband services, and I think $75 on tribal lands. We're seeing a lot of promotion now around apartment buildings and multiple dwelling units, public access Wi-Fi, training programs. Libraries and school districts are community education and so on, certainly full of that. Inclusive language environments, if you have a lot of Spanish speaking people, making sure you're offering training in those programs and so on, or older adults. And then here's the ACP program. You can see the income limits for that program. And again, it's a $30 subsidy that goes, a subscriber applies to the federal government, and then the provider gets that fund directly to them and shows up as a discount on the provider bill. And so that we've seen, because of the complicated nature of that program, community efforts to help people subscribe to that program have been really important. And so with that, I'm going to end that show and stop sharing. Find that. Good. So that's a lot of information. So a lot to chew on. And if you feel a little overwhelmed, don't worry, because we'll revisit a lot of that information, especially on the technology and on some of the partnership options. So on, you can see with the calendar that we go through this kind of circle around to come back to a lot of these topics, and you'll start to see how they really fit together and can work together as we go. People have any questions?
I have one. Looking through the way that you described the different types of broadband, as we think about the survey that's coming, that we're going to be putting out, should we be thinking about it not only as what we have now, and I mean that by the type of access that people have, but where we think we need to be? Again, you're hearing my strategic plan thinking where we want to be 15 to 20 years from now, and what that access should look like.
We do, and the survey instrument covers both of those things, kind of present. What is your current use of the technology and your satisfaction? And then it also has elements of looking towards the future. We look at how many devices people have. We ask them how they would use broadband differently if they had better broadband, start a business, go to school, and kind of stimulate that thinking about the future for broadband. I think it will definitely help influence your discussion in your community groups about what's important. One of the most important questions, and certainly the most interesting, we ask people on the survey, we say, what is your broadband story? And it's, we hear both stories of heartbreak, of people hoping for better broadband, or the challenges that people face because the broadband service is poor. Also, we hear stories about when people say, hey, my broadband is great, and here's what I do with it. It allows me to work from home or support my kids' education. And so people really, it's really great to kind of hear what people's reflection of their current situation is and how they need it to improve for the future.
I guess I'll give my example from this weekend. As I played around with Starlink this weekend, and the advantage I saw, which you didn't have up there, is that it's mobile. So I can move it around and take it with me wherever I need to go. And so when you think of some of the rural areas that are around here, if I can hook it up to something and I'm driving it on my ATV, and now I have access to wireless everywhere, anywhere on my farm, to me, there's pros and cons that, just as we're thinking through that as well.
You know, there's no doubt. So when people say, well, you know, which do we want, wired or wireless? And I think the answer is always both. That the idea of having, you know, whether you work on a farm or work, you know, recreate as a hunter or whatever you're doing out as you go, just as a person, you know, covering a lot of areas, if you're delivering parts for your company, if you're so many different uses for mobile technology that we know about, that's really important. We know too that if you want great cellular coverage, you need to have fiber networks that connect to those towers that are going to provide that mobile cellular data. And then also, you know, that fixed wireless, when they talk about that, that is really a non-mobile kind of solution. That's from a tower to somebody's house, because that you have to have line of sight and you have to have the antenna facing right at the radios on the towers. But that's also another kind of activity that has value. You know, if you're trying to connect a bunch of farm buildings, outlying farm buildings, you know, that fixed wireless can be a good solution. And then really with that on a farm, a lot of times we're seeing farmers having maybe a fiber connection or a powerful fixed wireless connection to their main farm building, but then using different types of wireless connectivity on the farm to connect different buildings and devices and sensors and feed mixers and or blenders and all kinds of different technology uses on a farm connecting to the tractor. We see a lot of that can be satellite or cellular. So farmers have their work cut out for them in terms of the types of connections that they need to be super efficient with their equipment. Good. Other questions or comments? So if not, I want to thank you for your attention today. We're going to go into our breakout rooms again, and each community can really talk about their logistics of, you know, how they want to meet. And we've had a lot of times in our schedule that we say, okay, the first hour is content to you, the second hour is your community meeting. Some communities decide, hey, we want to have a separate meeting time or meet again, or figure out how the communications are going to go from, you know, from the coordinator out to the community members or to the team. And so, and then look at your team and say, who else do we need on our team? Or if you know of people who you think would be great team members, you can suggest that and recruit those folks as well. So make sure that you've got coverage in terms of geography and different industry sectors. If you have any computer sales and service people in your county, they really know about people's struggles for broadband and people's use of technology. If you have people who are kind of providing web and e-commerce kind of services, they also are highly knowledgeable about your local broadband situation. Your school technology coordinator, they know about the different fiber networks and so on in your county. So take a look at your team and just make sure that you've got the best possible team for your community. So Reed,
Right.
if you want to open up the rooms again, that'd be great.
Definitely. All right, everyone should get a pop-up here in a second.